Scooby-Doo, and the Torchbearer's grief. On a quiet morning, Amy Rogers stood in her kitchen, the weight of silence pressing down on her since her husband Edward's passing. The air vibrated with an unnatural chill, and her siblings, triplets, bound by blood and burden, sat wordlessly at the table, until Shelby muttered, "That witch." The phrase fractured the quiet like glass. Shaggy, sitting near the counter with his phone, dropped it in alarm, and smacked his head under the table in fear. "What witch?" he whimpered. Amy didn't flinch. Her hands trembled only slightly as she turned off the stove, and walked toward the table. "Lucinda Rogers," she said plainly. "Your grandmother." A heavy silence followed. Even Scooby, curled beside the kitchen doorway, gave a low growl. "She wasn't always feared," Amy continued, staring into her coffee as if it might explain something she couldn't. "But the day Edward's father died, something else woke up with her grief, and it never slept again." The Torchbearer's grief. The story of Lucinda Rogers expanded, continuing from the flashbacks. The House of Silence. Flashback 1. Lucinda was 8 the first time her father struck her for asking a question. It wasn't a slap, it was a slow, surgical backhand. No raised voice, no warning. His wedding ring sliced her cheek open, and he wiped his hand on a napkin before sitting back down like nothing had happened. Her mother, born July 2nd, fell to her knees. "Whoa, God," she cried, pressing a hand to her chest, gasping like the world had just ended. Lucinda sat there on the cold floor, one hand over her face, the other clenched into a fist, not because of the pain, but because her mother did nothing, nothing to stop him, nothing to defend her, just weeping, weeping like a bystander in her own house. That night, Lucinda didn't cry. Instead, she crawled beneath her bed with a book clutched to her chest, and began whispering to the shadows, "If nobody protects me, I'll protect myself." The room flickered. The shadows listened. The greenhouse door. Flashback 2. She was 13 when she saw her father try to drown a dog in the greenhouse basin. It was a stray, a mangy little creature with golden fur and cataracts in both eyes. Lucinda had been sneaking him bread for weeks. She walked in just as the dog thrashed under his grip, gasping, flailing. Lucinda screamed, lunged, and her father's hand snapped out, gripping her wrists so hard her bones clicked. He yanked her close, his voice a dead whisper. "You want to save something weak? You'll die with it." Lucinda didn't scream, she didn't beg, she stared into his eyes and whispered, "Then I'll never be weak again." The air in the greenhouse turned ice cold. Every flower wilted at once. The water stilled. Her father jerked back as if burned. The dog coughed, sputtered, and stumbled free. Lucinda stepped between them. Something had entered her that moment, like a spirit born from the rage of 1,000 broken daughters. She named that dog Ash. He never left her side. The portrait. Flashback 3. Years later, Lucinda sat in the living room alone, staring at the fireplace mantel. A portrait of her father and mother stared back at her. He in a suit, her in pearls. Picture perfect. Her mother was long gone by then, having collapsed into some kind of soft dementia, weeping into handkerchiefs and rocking in corners while whispering Bible verses. She had collapsed emotionally long before that. Long before Lucinda became the kind of woman she swore she'd never be. Lucinda stared at the portrait and lit a match. One by one, she burned every photo of her childhood, not out of hatred, but out of refusal. Refusal to carry their faces any further. Ash whined from behind her. "I'm not them," Lucinda said aloud, almost to herself. "But I remember how they made me feel." She clutched her chest, the flame in her palm trembling, not with heat, but memory. "I felt everything." Back to the present. Amy stood at the kitchen window now, staring into the distance. The morning sun was rising, but the birds weren't singing. "They were both broken," she muttered. "Lucinda's parents. She became both of them," Shelby added bitterly. "The worst parts, the cruelty of her father, the emotional collapse of her mother." "She's not like that now," Amy replied, softer. "No," said Shelby, "she's worse." The torch reacts. Scooby barked from the living room. They all turned. The room flickered green for a split second. "She's closer than we thought," Amy whispered. Shaggy gripped the table. "Do you think she remembers me?" "Whoa, she remembers everything," Amy said. "That's the problem." The flashback. Decades earlier, Lucinda lived alone, not because she wanted to, but because the world was quieter when no one else could lie to her. She spent her mornings sweeping, not the floor, but memories. Her fingertips skimmed a faded photograph of her husband Marius Rogers, the sweetest man, who once moved mountains for her. He used to call her his storm, chaotic, wild, and breathtaking. The day he died in her arms, clutching her close, something in her shattered. She was pregnant with Edward then, grief-stricken, and poisoned with helpless rage. That night she took a torch, a peculiar one with a green flame, and stepped into the village square. The crowd parted, some ran, some bowed. She rejoiced in their terror. Fear had become her sanctuary, her armor, her sword, but it hadn't always been this way. The origin of her rage. Lucinda was born 1 month early, a fragile infant swaddled in silence. For 7 years, she didn't speak. Her parents thought she was mute, silent as the shadows that crawled across the walls at dusk. But when she did speak, her voice came out sharp, as if it had been sharpened on stone. People listened. They always listened after that. As a child, she lived for books. She'd fall asleep by the window with a novel clutched to her chest, her dreams tangled in questions too big for her age. At 5, she returned home one day with a trembling baby rabbit cradled in her arms. She named him Blanket, because his warmth calmed her racing thoughts. But their home was not safe. Her mother, born July 2nd, wept daily over regrets and things she couldn't control. Her father, born May 9th, was unmoved by anything, cold, unforgiving. When he tried to sell Blanket for a few dollars, Lucinda dropped to her knees. "No, Daddy, no, please no." The cry didn't just come from her throat, it tore through her soul, and for the first time in his life, her father hesitated. Blanket was spared, but something else died in Lucinda that day. Trust. The death of Marius. Marius Rogers loved her deeply, her late husband almost too deeply. He feared what the world would do to her, and what she might do in return. When their village fell under attack, he did the unthinkable. The night Marius died, the last hour in their bedroom, the room was heavy with the scent of rain-soaked earth and fading lavender, the kind of night that presses in close, making walls feel like they're breathing. Lucinda lay tangled beneath the worn quilt, the fabric rough against her skin, a faint sheen of sweat on her brow. Her chest heaved, heart racing with the weight of invisible storms. Outside, the wind whispered warnings through cracked window panes, but inside, silence stretched thick between them. Marius sat on the edge of the bed, his shadow long and twisted in the flicker of a dying candle. His eyes, usually so warm and wild, were steady, almost cold tonight. He reached out, fingers trembling as they brushed a stray strand of hair from her forehead. "I don't want to lose you," he whispered, voice raw with a mix of fear and something else, something desperate. Lucinda swallowed hard, chest tightening as if the air itself had thickened. "Marius, what are you saying?" He hesitated, hands clasping a small glass half filled with a dark, amber liquid. "It's a sleeping herb, just enough to keep you safe." "Safe?" Her voice cracked, eyes narrowing. "Safe from what?" His gaze faltered. "From them, from the fight that's coming, from this madness we can't stop." Lucinda's breath caught. The war had already stolen so much, homes burned, lives shattered. But here, now in this fragile bubble, she reached for hope. "No," she said, voice firmer than she felt. "I won't." Before she could stop him, Marius tilted the glass, pressing it to her lips. The liquid slipped down, bitter and thick, burning the back of her throat. She tried to pull away, weak arms flailing, pushing his chest. "Marius, don't please." But exhaustion dragged her down like drowning. "Trust me," he pleaded, voice breaking. "I'll come back, I promise." Her eyelids fluttered, heavy as stones. Her fingers grazed his arm one last time, seeking the man she loved, the man she thought would fight for her. But when she blinked open her eyes again, the room was empty. The candle guttered, the rain pounded harder against the roof, and Marius was gone. Lucinda's breath caught in a shallow gasp as the first wave of terror crashed over her. The soft creak of floorboards, a distant shout. The world outside had shattered. That night, alone and trembling beneath the quilt, she clenched the torch, the green flame of fragile pulse in the dark, and vowed that fear would never bind her again. Lucinda awoke to the crackle of fire and the screams of villagers. She bolted outside barefoot, screaming his name. Instead, she saw a soldier break into her home with sword in hand, but the blade turned. It twisted on its own, impaling the soldier instead. His comrade cried, "You stabbed yourself," but his hands were clean. Something invisible had intervened. Lucinda picked up the torch from beside her doorstep. It blazed green. The soldiers ran, women screamed, and Lucinda stood alone in the square, her eyes glowing with something inhuman, something ancient, that had been waiting inside her all along. The night of the green torch, Lucinda's wrath unleashed. The air was thick, heavy like a storm breathing just beyond the horizon. Lucinda stepped out into the street, the hem of her coat trailing behind her like a shadow unraveling. The cobblestones were slick with rain and reflection, but she barely noticed. Grief coiled inside her, a serpent tightening, whispering venom into her blood. It was cold and unrelenting, biting at her skin through the thin fabric of her dress. In her hand, the torch burned with an unnatural green flame, not warm, but fierce, flickering like a heart caught between life and death. She held it high once, just once. The smallest children screamed, their voices slicing through the quiet night like shattered glass. They scattered, their tiny feet pounding against the pavement as they fled from the spectral fire in her grasp. Lucinda's breath came ragged, a low growl rising from deep within her chest. "You took him," she hissed, eyes blazing like twin coals. "My Marius, you took him from me." Her voice was a weapon, a curse cast into the night. "You will pay." She was alone, pregnant and abandoned in a world that had turned its back. The same man who had once been her sanctuary, her storm, her shield, was gone, bloodied and lost beneath a sky that no longer promised dawn. Her wrath boiled beneath her skin. It was unfamiliar and ancient all at once, wild and raw, like the thunder rolling through her bones. She did not know what she would become, but she knew this much: she was too far gone to turn back. Her mother's cold tears, her father's cruel silence, they were etched into her like scars no blade could sever. She would become both. She would wield this torch, this green fire of grief and fury, each night, stalking the streets where shadows dared to breathe. And people, they would part. Some would stumble, tripping over their own fear, desperate to escape the blaze in her eyes. 2 months later, the world trembled again. Edward was born, a tiny, fragile spark, no bigger than a whisper. The birth was brutal, the night merciless, but as she held him, swaddled in threadbare blankets, and the weight of silence, something fragile bloomed inside her chest, a flicker of hope, impossible yet undeniable. She cradled him, whispering secrets into his ear, songs born of sorrow and fierce love. No doctors came, no hands of strangers comforted her, just a mother and her son, bound by a promise neither fully understood. The night he entered the world, he did not cry, he did not breathe, and Lucinda, worn thin by pain and despair, felt the edges of her soul start to fray. She lay there, body drained, mind slipping into shadows. Her soul floated in the in-between. Then a wail, a piercing, ragged cry bursting forth from his tiny lungs. Edward was alive. The sound was a lifeline thrown across the abyss. On certain nights, when the moon hung low, and the air hummed with old magic, Lucinda would tuck Edward inside the folds of her dress, the green torch clenched in her fist. Men would scream, kings and queens, emperors and princes, chiefs and soldiers, they all bowed or fled before her. The streets bowed to her grief, the night bowed to her fury, and Edward stood beside her, eyes wide with wonder and fear, unaware of the legacy he was inheriting, for he would grow to be the father of Norval Rogers, known to some as Shaggy, the husband of Amy Rogers, a story written in flame and shadow, carried through blood and whispered across generations. The Torchbearer's dominion, the next generation's fear. Lucinda stepped out into the night, the torch clenched tight in her hand, its green flame twisting like living flame snakes. The moment she appeared, children scattered, tiny feet pounding like thunder on cracked pavement, voices shrieking in terror. Her son, just 10 years old, slipped behind her, shivering beneath the folds of her long dress, hiding from the world he didn't yet understand. His eyes were wide and fearful, darting out between the fabric shadows. Just one glance from Lucinda, and men and women who ruled kingdoms and empires bowed their heads. She was a storm, a reckoning, a queen crowned by grief and fire. The lake's quiet prayer. Later, beneath the heavy cloak of night, Lucinda sat by the still waters of the lake, the torch extinguished, but the air still crackling with tension. Her son, crumbs of a loaf of bread scattered around him, nibbled quietly beside her. She whispered into the darkness, voice raw with the weight of longing and fury. If things were different, her fingers traced the water's glassy surface. If Marius had planned it all, if he'd been here. Her breath caught, eyes fixed on the horizon, where sky met water in a seamless void. Would he have approved of this? She gestured to the ruins left in her wake, the burned homes, the shattered lives, the thrill of power, the cold satisfaction of fear, the loneliness beneath it all. Would he have understood the woman she'd become, or would he have mourned her still, just as much as she mourned him? Her son looked up, cheeks flushed with the cold and unease, clutching her hand with a fragile hope. In that silence, beneath the watching stars, grief and love twisted tight, and for the first time in a long time, the queen wondered if the fire she carried could ever truly warm a broken heart. Next scene, household shadows. The night everything changed. It was a quiet evening cloaked in deceptive calm. The only sound was the ticking of the old grandfather clock in the hall, and the creak of floorboards under weight not yet seen. Edward was 13 when he and his mother, Lucinda Rogers, traveled back to the family estate, a towering house smothered in ivy and silence. Edward's grandfather, Benjamin Fairchild, was waiting, arms crossed, silver hair slicked with a hard comb. He stood in the pasture holding a whip. "You'll learn how to use it," the old man growled, throwing the leather coil into Edward's hands. "You don't ask horses to move, you make them." Edward's hands trembled. He didn't want to hurt the animal. He'd always loved animals, gentle creatures that didn't yell or punish. The horse refused to move. Edward hesitated. Grandfather's eyes narrowed like a tightening noose. "Hit it." Edward flinched. He dropped the whip. "I'm not doing it," he whispered, backing away. "Grandma." He turned to run for the house. That's when it struck. Benjamin's open hand crashing against the boy's cheek. "You tell your mother," he spat through clenched teeth. "I dare you, boy. And you'll pay the price." Edward staggered, stunned, a welt blooming red across his face. He blinked fast to hold back the tears as he stared into the chilling gaze of a man who fathered fire, but only ever wielded it to burn. Inside, Lucinda had heard the shouting. She stepped into the doorway, her eyes landing on her son. Edward's breath hitched. "Mom." Lucinda's face contorted with rage. She rushed forward, fire aching to erupt from her palms. But she hesitated. Her father was standing right there, watching her. She could wield the flame, but never in front of him. Not even now. Not ever. Benjamin's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "You lost your place the moment you left this family. You think a little fire will scare me?" Lucinda's jaw clenched. She stepped aside. The fire in her dimmed, swallowed by fear and generational chains. She led Edward inside. They didn't talk about it. They didn't dare. A dying flame. Weeks passed. One night, the silence of the house broke not with yelling, but with weeping. Lucinda's mother, Mary Fairchild, lay in bed, her breath shallow, her eyes dulled with time. The nurses moved gently around her like ghosts. The family stood in mourning before death arrived. Edward sat by her side, holding her fragile hand. "Grandma?" His voice cracked. Mary's eyes fluttered. "Sweet boy," she rasped, her voice no louder than a breeze. You have your mother's heart. Never forget who you are, Edward." He leaned closer, and her hand cupped his cheek, soft, trembling. "As time went on, I couldn't keep my light burning. I let him steal it." She looked to the ceiling, and her hand slipped from his. "Still, gone." Edward stared in raw, silent horror. His grandmother, his one safe place, had vanished into the sky. Lucinda rushed to the doorway, desperate to get to her son, to hold him, to say goodbye to the woman who gave her gentleness where her father gave only war. But Benjamin was already there, grabbing her arm before she crossed the threshold. "You're not welcome here," he barked. "Let me in," she demanded, chest heaving. "The witch is in my house," he shouted, and suddenly his men, surrounded her, like she was some threat, some curse. Lucinda trembled, her flame boiled under her skin, but she didn't fight, not yet. Edward looked over his shoulder, wanting to run to his mother, but the world between them was a barricade of obedience and fear. He never forgot that night. Years later, the torch returns. Lucinda spent the next decade in exile. The years dragged her into her late 40s, 50, 56. She raised the torch as a weapon now, not a symbol. And when she returned to the estate, the place where her voice was silenced, her father was 77, frail, but still venomous. She held the torch high in front of him. He didn't flinch. He smirked. "Took you long enough." But something always held her back. The flames pulsed in her hands, but stopped short of revenge. Edward. He was orphaned now, gone, taken in by a cousin Lucinda never knew. Her body collapsed on the village street outside the gates of her childhood, unable to carry the weight of decades anymore. As she fell to the stone, unconscious, a breeze lifted her hair. Or was it a shadow? It stood there, watching, not judging, just waiting. Years later, the torchbearer's grief, Lucinda's reckoning. Present day. The wind was sharp as glass. Lucinda Rogers stepped out into the street, an old woman now, her long coat flapping behind her like a flag from a war no one remembered but her. The torch in her hand still burned green. It always had. Its flame never flickered, not even in the rain. The sky dimmed when she appeared. Neighbors bolted their windows. Children screamed. Someone dropped groceries on the curb and ran. She didn't flinch. She never did. Her eyes were hollowed with years of grief. Not because she loved the power, but because she had long forgotten how to live without it. The torch was the last thing she had left of him, of Marius, her husband, her heart, the only person who ever touched her gently without flinching at the cold. He had been killed during a political fight, a foolish act of sacrifice in a war neither of them asked for. She had been only 21 when she saw his blood hit the ground, his wedding band still warm in her hand. The world screamed around her, but she didn't scream back. She just lit the torch. That was the moment she stopped being a person and started being a warning. That night, she stood alone in the square, surrounded by ash and broken buildings, and all she heard was her father's voice, echoing through her bones. Control them before they control you. So she did. She became him, the one thing she swore she'd never become, her father's daughter. Even now, decades later, every step she took echoed like his, every order she barked, every room she entered like thunder. She never hit her son, but she froze him with her presence. She never silenced anyone's mouth, but their hearts fell quiet around her, just like they did with him. She never meant to be cruel. She was just terrified to let go. Holding on to the torch was like holding on to Marius. Letting go of it would be like killing him again. Mall chaos. The green flame in the shopping halls. Lucinda stumbled through automatic sliding doors into a world that buzzed with noises she barely understood. The drone of fluorescent lights, the murmur of strangers wrapped in polyester and plastic bags, the endless hum of commerce that felt distant and wrong. Her breath hitched, the green torch in her hand sputtering like a heartbeat struggling to survive. A mother nearby caught sight of her. Eyes wide and wild with instinctive fear, she grabbed her child's hand and sprinted, dragging the small figure behind her like a shield. The panic was contagious. Whispers erupted, then shouts. Shoppers scattered like startled birds. Carts clattered over tiled floors. The scent of popcorn and cinnamon abruptly tainted with terror. Lucinda's world narrowed. She felt it. The electric prickling of threat, like cold fingers crawling beneath her skin. Instinctively, she lifted the torch higher, its eerie green blaze spilling light over stunned faces. A scream burst from a woman near the frozen foods aisle. A man dropped his basket and fled. The air cracked with tension. And then, Scooby-Doo stepped forward. The dog usually fled the first sign of trouble, but now he stood, fur bristling, eyes locked on Lucinda. For a moment, she lowered the torch, not in fear, but in silent acknowledgement. Their eyes met. In that glance, she glimpsed a shard of the woman she once was, the girl who cradled lost creatures, the daughter who loved animals more than people. A flicker of softness warmed her heart, but just as quickly, she shook it off. Her grief was a fortress, her rage a blade. She raised the torch again, locking her heart behind walls no one could breach. Lucinda stepped forward, the green fire casting long shadows. Her presence dared anyone to approach. The mall was no longer a place of escape, it was a battleground. The mall standoff, Lucinda and the law. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, their harsh glare cutting through the shadow that Lucinda cast as she stood motionless in the heart of the bustling mall. The green flame of the torch she gripped cast eerie ripples of light across her weathered face, her eyes fierce, unblinking. A small squad of law enforcement officers approached cautiously, their boots clicking against the tile floor, guns holstered, but fingers twitching near triggers. They formed a loose semicircle, a cordon between her and the terrified crowd shrinking away to the walls. Sergeant Ramirez stepped forward, his jaw tight, voice low but steady. "Ma'am, please put down the torch. This isn't the way to solve anything." Lucinda's gaze didn't waver. She lifted the torch just a fraction higher. The flame flickered, and the air around her seemed to pulse. "I am not here to negotiate." The officers exchanged uneasy looks. Officer Green swallowed hard. "Ma'am, people are scared. Kids are crying. We need you to calm down." She let out a bitter laugh, dry, without humor. "Calm? My husband is dead. My son was born early, fighting for every breath. You want me to be calm?" Another step forward. Captain Lee, older, gray at the temples, but eyes sharp as blades. "We understand you're grieving, but this is a public place. You're putting people in danger." Lucinda's voice was cold steel, laced with pain. "Danger is already here. It's in their eyes, the fear they wear like chains. I am the danger they refuse to face." The torch's green light shimmered, bathing the walls in unnatural hues. Ramirez's hand twitched toward his radio but paused. "Ma'am, we want to help. Please tell us what you want." Her stare cut like ice. "I want justice. I want them to remember." "Remember what?" Green asked, voice trembling despite himself. "The price of loss, the weight of betrayal." A silence fell. The mall speakers crackled with an emergency announcement, but no one moved. Lucinda's voice softened, almost a whisper. "My husband was taken from me. My grief birthed this fire." Her eyes glinted, haunted and sharp. "This torch is not just flame, it is memory, it is warning." Captain Lee stepped forward carefully. "If you lower it, if you speak with us, maybe we can." "Maybe?" Lucinda interrupted sharply, stepping closer, the torch's light casting grotesque shadows. "Maybe you will understand what it means to be broken, to carry a flame so fierce it burns everything around it." Ramirez swallowed, voice steady but wary. "Ma'am, we don't want violence, but if you harm anyone, we will have to act." Her eyes narrowed, fierce. "Try me." For a long moment, no one moved. Then Lee nodded slowly, voice respectful. Tell us what we can do to help. Lucinda's grip tightened on the torch. Tell the world I'm not the monster. That's why you came here, Green said softly. She nodded, the fire in her eyes dimming to a simmer. I am warning, but I am also a warning. The officer shifted uneasily. Then help us understand. So we don't have to fear you. Lucinda's voice was a fragile tremor. Remember loss. Remember pain. Respect the fire that burns in those left behind. Ramirez lowered his radio, taking a breath. We hear you, but please, this isn't the place. She gave a slow, bitter smile. The place is wherever my grief leads me. The officers began to pull back, their posture more cautious now. Scooby padded silently to her side. Lucinda looked down at him briefly, then back at the officers. You will respect me, not out of kindness, she raised the torch once more, but out of fear. In a quiet suburban mall, Lucinda walked alone. Her grandson, Shaggy, spotted her near the escalators. He waved, until something towering shifted behind her, a massive shadow with broad shoulders, flickering like candlelight. Lucinda turned just in time to see it, and collapsed. Shaggy ran to her, shaking her shoulder. Gran? Her eyes snapped open. The green torch materialized in her grip. Chaos erupted. Shoppers fled, stampeding upstairs and elevators. Scooby barked in horror. The shadow lunged toward Shaggy, revealing not Marius, but a demon, cloaked in the illusion of love, feeding on grief. Lucinda's hand flew to her chest. She knew, you are not him. She lifted the torch, and the thing recoiled. After the recoil, the green flame's weight. Lucinda stood motionless, her eyes locked on the trembling green flame. It flickered like a living thing, wild and unpredictable, her tether to a grief so vast it threatened to swallow her whole. She was terrified. To truly let go to release the torch would be like losing Marius all over again, so she held on tighter, knuckles white around the handle, heart coiled in icy dread. Fred's quiet confession. Fred stepped closer, voice low, tentative, as if wading through memories as thorny as brambles. You know, when the town's hero, the football player, died, he began, eyes fixed on the flickering flame. I felt lost, like the ground beneath me cracked open. Everyone looked to me to be strong, to carry on, but inside, grief whispered lies. It told me I was better off alone, that if I shut the people I loved out, I wouldn't have to feel the pain of losing them. He paused, swallowing hard, then reached out. His rough hands gently clasped hers. You don't have to hide it all, Lucinda. You don't have to carry this alone. Lucinda looked away, the words unfamiliar, unsettling. I never thought of it that way, she murmured. Fred's voice softened. My dad, he struggled with grief too. It took him years to come back from the edge. Her grip on the torch tightened again, her defiance blazing brighter than ever. I'm not giving up. I want what I deserve. Shaggy's reminder. From the edge of the room, Shaggy lifted a worn photo, the one with Marius and Lucinda, smiling at their wedding, frozen in a moment of light and hope. Gran, no matter what, he loved you. He tried to protect you. Even if you didn't see it, he knew your curiosity could pull you into dark places, but he loved you too much to let you drown. Lucinda's breath hitched, but she remained unmoved. Daphne's gentle truth. Daphne stepped forward, voice calm but firm. Fred lost his father, Lucinda. Your husband wouldn't want you to become a shell of yourself. Lucinda's eyes flared with stubborn pain. She couldn't let go, not yet. When Velma reached out to gently touch the torch, Lucinda recoiled, irritation flashing in her gaze. Shaggy's steadfast presence. So Shaggy settled beside her quietly, his presence steady. We are family, Gran. No matter what. Lucinda heard the words, but couldn't reach them, lost in the fierce conviction that if she wielded fear itself, if she held onto the green flame, her husband would be proud. The spiritual visit. Then, as if summoned by her pain, a gentle warmth filled the room. Before her, shimmering softly, Marius appeared, not as the man taken by violence, but as a calm presence, his eyes filled with love. He reached out, his touch like a balm on her soul, whispering truths she had buried long ago. You are loved, Lucinda, not for the fear you wield, but for the girl you were, the woman you became. He spoke of her childhood, the loneliness and strength intertwined, the fierce heart that carried her through every dark night. You are not the monster you show the world, he said. That's only the armor. The moment of release. Lucinda's eyes flickered, first with confusion, then with something like peace. She leaned in slowly, almost reluctantly. The grip on the torch loosened, trembling in her hands. And then, as if the flame itself understood, the green flicker softened, glowing gold, warm, alive, and somehow healing. The torch slipped gently from her fingers,